My name is Faye Futch, and I am the research assistant / historian for the University of Arkansas Archaeological Survey. I grew up in Parkin, Arkansas, and the St. Francis River basically runs down the center of Parkin, Arkansas. I was fortunate enough to live in an area called the Bottoms. And when I say fortunate, because I experienced all of the great music and the juke joints in that area. And that is what my topic is about, basically the juke joints that existed here in Parkin. I lived on a street that had 10 juke joints. And the first one that I know about was owned by Mrs. Carrie Hudson. And it started on Front Street. She had came here from Mississippi, and she opened the joint. Well, after the sawmill opened in Parkin, Arkansas, a lot of African Americans started migrating here to work in the mill. So that she accommodated the weekends with entertainment there. And one of the most famous, well, he became famous later, was Howling Wolf. Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters lived on the Phillips Plantation north of Parkin, Arkansas, in a community called Togo. And he played in West Memphis, played what he called a Chitlin circuit. And there were a lot of circuits surrounding this area on the farms where the entertainers would go and play on weekends to that's the only way they could survive and make money. But anyway, my father, after he got out of the Army, Mrs. Carrie Hudson would hire him to go to West Memphis to pick up Muddy Waters to come back and play in her joint here in Parkin, Arkansas. And he later went on to become a famous recording artist. I know that he recorded at Sun Studios in Memphis, and later he went on to Chicago and recorded for Chess Records until, I guess that was the last place that he recorded. But a lot of his records are still played today, and he has family that still lives out at Parkin and in Memphis. The Civil War and Reconstruction, then African Americans had to devise some type of way for entertainment. So the juke joints is one of the main things that they created. Now basically, African Americans had to try to find some place to live and work and whatever during that time. So a lot of them ended up as tenant farmers and living on farms, but they had to have entertainment on the weekend. So basically what the owner of the farmer plantation would do would let them have a house or some type of building for weekly entertainment, and they were called juke joints. Now, the juke word came over from Africa. That tradition was brought up with them, and it was kind of meant rambunctious and loud and vulgar and whatever. But that's the term that was used. But most of what went on in the juke joints was dancing, music, gambling, fighting, and it's just a lot of things as far as entertainment. You might say that fighting wasn't a form of entertainment, but a lot of times they got to fighting, about gambling. Somebody lost a crap game, dice game, or whatever. But there was a lot of bootleg liquor. And on weekends, that mostly started happening on Friday night and Saturday night through Sundays. But Sunday night at 12 o'clock, everything had to be cut off because everybody had to go back to work. J.B. Walker was another one. He owned a teenage club that he built for us. He was a deacon at our church, but he knew that we liked to party, so that's where we went. And at 10 o'clock on Sunday nights, we would start from Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday. 10 o'clock on Sunday nights, he would come to the door and tell us all good things must come to an end. And that's what he would say, all good things must come to an end. And so we knew what that meant. But we had the jukebox and the pinball machine, and his wife ran the restaurant part and bar. She would sell us hamburgers and hot dogs and drinks and like that. But it was just a unique experience I wish that everybody could experience. I would end up at Babe Mason's place before it was over. At Babe Mason, he came from out of Twist. He had a juke joint out there at Twist on number 7. And he came into town. Miss Mary Blackman was already, she owned a brothel too. And she owned a juke joint right next to it. But she and Babe Mason went into business together. And at some point, he bought her out. And so he was still running a joint at Twist. and he was running the one at Parkin also. But eventually he closed one down at Twist and moved his family to Parkin. And like I said, it was a two-story one too, like I said previously. And it was just a jumping place. And occasionally he would have people from Memphis to come and show movies on a Sunday night. And he would always have a band. The jukeboxes were real popular. These jukeboxes that they owned, the man would come in that owned them. He would come in on every Monday morning, and a cigarette man. And they would come in and they would open the machines, and they would divide the money with the owner. And they made a lot of money that way. It was the same way with the cigarette machines. That person would come in, whoever owned the cigarette machines, they would come in and they would divide the money and they would get ready for the next week. So they made a lot of money that way. And everybody sold food. And I had the opportunity to work for my mother one time. She worked for Marion and Sherman Downs that owned the Blue Lagoon in Parkin. And she broke her leg, so I worked in her place. And I just fried so much chicken, I thought I would never. But anyway, the chickens basically consisted of 2 pieces of white bread with Miracle Whip, lettuce, tomato, and 2 pieces of chicken. And then I would have some gamblers that would leave the crab house and come there, and they would sit there, and I had to fry them a whole half chicken. And they would sit there and eat it until they got full and drank full of beer and everything, and then they would go back to the crab house. They had 2 of them that did that. I hated to see them coming because they would sit there and they would eat, I would fry chicken, and they would eat and eat. But chicken and pork chops and fish were the main delicacies, sandwiches that they would serve, and lots of bootleg beer. The Parkin police also came down to get their cut on a Saturday night or a Sunday night for letting them bootleg. A lot of things went on in Parkin, Arkansas, in the joint area, that district. And the place was originally named after Isaac R. Dye. It was called Dye's Bottom. And it was a white gentleman that had built a 2-story grocery store up on the corner just as you enter the bottoms. And he began to sell different portions of land, and that's why they called it Dye's Bottom. Another one of the famous juke joints was owned by Babe Mason. And this is a picture of one of his place. Babe Mason lived at Twist, Arkansas. And Twist, Arkansas was known for its famous juke joint. People come from miles around and out of the rural areas to visit it on weekends. And at Twist, Arkansas, at Babe Mason's place is where you heard of the famous fire where B.B. King had to go back in the juke joint and get his guitar. Well, anyway, that actually happened, but Muddy Waters played up there, and B.B. King played there. There was another famous club also across the street that was run by Mr. Jerry Walker. He owned the juke joint, and in addition to the juke joint, he had what he called the goat house. It was a one-room structure that sit high on some bricks, but then next door to his juke joint, he had what you call the goat house. And the goat house was just a big tent where people used to, someone used to own goats, but that's where they gambled. That's where they had all the big crab frames out there. But all of the juke joints had crab houses. That was one of the main things that they did. And as we grew older, we would sit out on the porch and listen to all the music. And there was one particular man, Mr. Jerry Walker, he would play the blues all night long. I mean, even when you were asleep, he would stay open all night, and he just enjoyed it. And the famous song that he played was 3 o'clock in the morning by B.B. King. I never will forget it. And this is a copy of the juke joint that was at Hicks Station that was owned by Kate Malone and his family. That was very popular also. And this was the last of the famous juke joints that I call here. It was located at Mound City Road. And fortunately, a couple of years ago, I went out to take pictures of this in search of juke joints because a friend of mine, Cindy Grisham, and I used to be in search of all the juke joints in this area that I remember. And now it is owned by about Wilson's. Went up to Wilson, Arkansas. They have changed all of that. This place doesn't look the same. It's a beautiful event center now. but they have done wonders up there with that. But I was glad I got a chance to go up and take pictures of the last famous joint that was operating in Crittenden County during that time. And that owned a liquor store here in Parkin, and those that bootleg, except Babe Mason now. Babe Mason did his own thing. They sold liquor for him, and there were two women that owned juke joints too, and they sold liquor for him also. Now occasionally they would be busted by the sheriff, and that periodically he had to do his job. So one night in particular, Mrs. Ethel Broadneck, she lived next door to us, and her grandson that worked, well, she worked him, I'll say it like that. He was the one responsible for carrying out all the bottles and the cans and liquor stuff. But one particular night, the sheriff raided the house, and he gathered all the stuff and threw it under our house, which was next door. And he found it under our house the next morning. But anyway, like I said, everything went on. There was another house that's owned by Miss Almeida. She owned a two-story juke joint that had a brothel upstairs, and she also had a crab house right next door, and it was ran by Mr. Jim Bobcat. So he handled all the gambling there. But it was just a district comparable to Beale Street. As a matter of fact, the street that I lived on, that was back of where I grew up, was originally called Beale Street. But I researched and I found out that Beale Street in Memphis was older than our Beale Street. But I looked at the 1930 census for Jerry Walker, and he actually lived on Beale Street, which was directly behind our house. So we had a Beale Street in Parkin. And I guess they tried to live up to that name, but it was a lot of shooting and cutting and fighting, and my sisters and I, we experienced a lot of things that went on, but we enjoyed the music most of all. We started preparing ourselves on Friday evenings, and we could hear that music, and we started getting ready to go. They also had live bands, and occasionally we would have live bands in Parkin, especially Babe Mason. Babe Mason had a two-story juke joint. Upstairs, he had a brothel, and we had a big dance floor, and we would just dance all night, just dance, dance, dance. And occasionally, he would have a live band to come in from Memphis to play for us. And that's one of the things the young people now, they really haven't experienced with live bands. They have what they call DJs now. But we actually had live bands down in the bottoms. And most of the joints that was on the out on the highways and on the farms. I enjoyed the juke joints because I just wouldn't take nothing for that experience, because dancing is what I love, what my sisters and I love, my mother loved, and she would always come back and teach us before we got big enough to go out. Then she would always come in and teach us what the latest dance would be. My mother was a great dancer, and her brother was too. And we thoroughly enjoyed that. I think they started fading out in the early 80s. And in 1985, my brother was murdered well, it was outside of the joint. But anyway, at that time, my father began a campaign to shut the last juke joint down. And it didn't close up right away, but it did happen. Now, with the juke joints, there were a lot of clubs that existed. There was, they had a male's club, and my mother's club was the women's club. And they would have big Christmas parties, perhaps they would wear red dresses, and they had what they call Blue Monday parties, where if it would rain, then the people that worked on the farm, they would come into the bottoms and spend the day there and drink beer and whatever. And they would have card parties. They all had card parties. But the Blue Monday parties were really, really good too. Everybody came in. But when the sun was shining, then they'd have to go back to work the next day.